Video 3, triggers, formal stages and final absence hearings. So this slide covers the trigger points, patterns of sickness absence, the formal stages, how to conduct the formal meetings and the final absence hearing. So trigger points. They are used to highlight certain levels of sickness or patterns of sickness that require further attention, and that'll determine where and when you should take management action. So the intention of the triggers is to ensure that sickness is managed proactively, fairly, and consistently across the trust. So these are targets, and they should be used as a benchmark to measure if the sickness absence are acceptable. However, cases should be managed and reviewed on a case-by-case basis. So it may be agreed for some staff to have an adjustment to their trigger point. So for example, if they have a disability. Sickness absence levels are calculated over a rolling 12-month period. This is where you look back from a specific date, 12 months from that date. So this could be the first day of sickness absence, and you simply just look back 12 months from that point. So where sickness absence meets or exceeds a trigger point, managers should put the employee on the relevant formal stage of the policy and conduct the formal stage meeting. If an employee is currently not on a stage on the policy and they hit the trigger point, they should be referred to stage 1. If they're already on a stage, they just need to be referred on to the next formal stage if they trigger during their 12-month monitoring period. Please note, however, that although an employee may not be on a stage, you must check that they weren't on formal stage 3 monitoring in that previous year, because if they were, they will automatically trigger stage 2 instead of stage 1, but I'll explain that in more detail a bit later on in the video. So the formal 12-month monitoring period starts on the employee's return to work date from a period of sickness. So this is the next calendar day after a period of sickness ends, even if it's not their working day. So let's say someone's sickness ends on the 1st of July, the return to work date will be the 2nd of July. Even if they're not working that day, there might be a day off or a non-working day or annual leave. So it's important to know that their monitoring period started on the 2nd and that it ends on the 1st of July the following year. So we often see that managers will say that their monitoring period starts on the 2nd of July and ends on the 2nd of July. It's not, that's a year and a day. So trigger points. When somebody is not on a stage, the stage 1 triggers are as follows. So 4 episodes of absence in a 12-month rolling period. They collectively exceed 2 working weeks of sickness in a rolling 12-month period, or there is a concerning pattern of absence. So, for example, they might be sick every Christmas or on their birthday, for example. With the 4 episodes trigger, this can be of any duration. So, say in a rolling 12-month period, they could have had an episode of 1 day of sickness, another one of 2 days, a third episode of another day. So, although that totals 4 days, that's 3 episodes and that's fine. That doesn't trigger. That next episode, their 4th episode of sickness, does trigger, regardless if that is even a part day where they've worked less than 50% of the shift. So let's say, as an example, somebody goes off today and let's say it's the 25th of January. You then look back 12 months to the 26th of January the previous year and then count the episodes. So with the exceeding 2 working weeks trigger, you've just got to be careful with part-time staff, as their working week, for example, might be 3 days a week. It could be different days each week, so they might work 1 week, 3 days, a week after 4. So just make sure when you're looking at their exceeding 2 weeks that it's exceeding 2 weeks of their average working week. So if somebody's full-time and what normally works Monday to Friday 9 till 5, their trigger for exceeding 2 weeks would be their 11th working day, because 2 weeks doesn't trigger, is when they exceed that. So when staff are off long-term sick, long-term sickness is defined as any sicknesses exceeding 3 working weeks. So they automatically will trigger this because it's obviously over 2 working weeks. Staff may have various episodes. So they might have had an episode where they've been off a working week. Then they may have another episode where they've been off a working week, that's fine. But if their second episode, for example, is 6 working days, you have to count it collectively. So if collectively their absence exceeds 2 working weeks, they have triggered under this. So it might be that they trigger with a pattern of sickness. So it might not fall under the 4 episodes. It might not exceed 2 working weeks, but with patterns, it doesn't have to. So somebody could report as sick on their birthday. Then they might report as sick on their birthday the next year. Okay, you might find that odd or a coincidence. But then say they do that again the 3rd year in a row, that is a pattern. So it's just being aware of that. And it could just be that it's 1 day each year, but it happens every year. Where you have suspicion, you can escalate them as a pattern to the next formal stage. Just get some HR advice and we can just review that with you as well. So as soon as staff members trigger, they are put on the formal stage, let's say stage 1. This normally takes place during a stage 1 meeting. So that's after they've returned to work, following that period of sickness that has triggered. So you need to inform them of their monitoring period. So that's that 12-month period that starts on the return to work date. So this is the next calendar day from that last episode of sickness, even if they're not in work, as I've explained earlier. So you need to explain to them what their new trigger points are, as this changes once they're on a stage. So if they're already on stage 1, 2 or 3, their trigger points are different. So it's not 4 episodes and exceeding 2 weeks. It's then 3 episodes, or if they exceed 1 working week of sickness, that will trigger the next formal stage. If they trigger during that monitoring period. So when an employee reports as sick, managers should see if they've hit a trigger. If they are not on a formal stage, look back 12 months from when that sickness started. If they are on a stage, you need to look at the sickness that occurred during the monitoring period. For example, someone triggered stage 1, the monitoring period started on the 15th of June 2020 and it ends on the 14th of June 2021. Let's say they went off sick on the 25th of January 2021. You might want to write this down in a time frame if it's easier to understand that way. Let's say they went off sick on the 25th of January 2021 and their monitoring period is the 15th of June 2020 to the 14th of June 2021. So all you need to do is look back from when their monitoring period started on the 15th of June up to today, the 25th of Jan. So you just need to look at that period to see if they've triggered that next stage. If it is say their first episode or their second episode and it totals less than a working week or less, that's fine, they won't trigger. It's when it's exceeding that, so more than 1 working week or 3 episodes. So keep an eye on this. Health roster or ESR contains the employee's sickness absence information. You should look at this to identify if the trigger has been hit. That is if you've recorded it correctly. We are aware that sometimes managers have agreed for staff to use annual leave or compassionate leave, etc., instead of sickness. So these episodes do not count when you're looking at counting how many episodes they've had, as it's not recorded as sickness. When an employee hits any of the triggers, you should inform that employee that they have hit a formal stage. And then you invite them into the formal stage meeting. So the stage 1 and 2 meetings can be held without HR there. And it may be agreed with the employee that you want to hold that meeting sooner than the 7-day notice period, if they are happy and if they don't want a union present. This is one of the changes in the current policy. So in these circumstances, no pressure should be placed on the employee to do this. So it's important that you document if you have agreed to hold the meeting sooner in their outcome letter. In this case, you may send the employee the invite letter in retrospect. So let's just say, for example, the employee's been off sick, they've triggered a formal stage, they come back to work, you tell them they've hit that stage in the return to work meeting, let's just say it's stage 1. They've got a bit of anxiety about this meeting. Actually, after you've done the return to work interview, you might want to just get the stage 1 meeting out of the way for their benefit. 'Cause if you give them that 7-day notice period, it might create a bit of stress and anxiety. So you offer them to do the stage 1 there and then. They agree, so that they're aware that they can have 7 days notice, and they can bring a union rep to the meeting if they want. But if they're happy to do that there, you can go ahead and do that there. You might not have the letter to invite them to the meeting to hand, so you send that obviously after the meeting in retrospect to say, we had this meeting on this date. But just make sure if you do that, you have got that documented. In them circumstances, if say you've got a big busy ward and it's often that people would rather get the stage meeting out of the way once you've done the return to work. Again, no pressure on the employee. It might be worth printing off a wad of invite letters so you've got it there to hand, and just have gaps where their name, address, the date, the time of the meeting, all the meeting information blank, so that when it just saves you a bit of time, that you can give them the invite letter there and then just putting in the name, the details of the meeting, and sign it, rather than after the meeting having to type it all up, print it out, post it, all of that jazz. So it might actually save you a bit of time if you've got them there to hand. So when looking back at previous sickness absence, if an employee has triggered, but they were previously on a stage, but they're off formal monitoring, you have to look back at the 12-month period, but don't count any sickness that fell in a monitoring period that they've come off. That sickness has already been accounted for in that previous monitoring period. So just look back. If they're not on a formal stage and they're off the monitoring, just count that period that doesn't include the monitoring period. Managers should keep an up-to-date, accurate record of all employees' formal stages. So if you look in the toolkit, we've got a formal stages record template in there, and it's literally just a table that you can put in the employees' names and dates and when they triggered stages, things like that. It's just easier to keep a record of it that way. Patterns of absence. If you notice a suspicious pattern of absence, this in itself can be a trigger and can trigger the next formal stage. Please seek advice from HR though before you do that. These are some examples of what patterns can be. So falling sick on a birthday on more than one occasion, falling sick during the school holidays on more than one occasion, falling sick on a certain day of the week on more than 2 occasions. For example, they fall sick every Friday. Falling sick on or around a public holiday like Christmas, New Year's, Easter on more than one occasion. Falling sick after a celebration on more than one occasion. And repeated part-day sickness episodes. Please note, in these circumstances, managers should ask employees about any disabilities or long-term conditions. Although we appreciate it can sometimes be unfortunate or coincidental, if on the balance of probability we feel that there is a clear pattern, we can escalate them to the next formal stage. Staff should use annual leave, take unpaid leave, or agree to work their time back if they can, if they are not actually sick. If it is identified that the staff member is not genuinely sick, for example, you might see something on a Facebook post or a friend's reported that they've been out drinking or whatever it is, this can actually constitute gross misconduct, and the disciplinary policy can be invoked. It is actually deemed as fraud. So when people are reporting as sick and they're not actually sick, it is fraud. So in them cases, you need to contact the counter fraud team in the first instance. Formal stages. So if you look in the toolkit, there's a formal stages flowchart in there that just makes sense of when to escalate to the next formal stage. So stage 1, to trigger that, a member of staff either has to have 4 episodes of absence in a 12-month period, exceed 2 working weeks of absence in that 12-month period, or have the concerning pattern. For example, a full-time employee will not trigger stage 1 if they have had 1 episode of 1 working day, a 2nd episode of 1 working week, and a 3rd episode of less than 4 working days, as cumulatively it equates to 2 working weeks and 3 episodes. However, the 4th episode, regardless of how long, will trigger. Stage 2, 3, and to trigger a final absence hearing, if somebody has more than 1 working week off sick or exceeds 2 episodes of absence, they're allowed 2, it's their 3rd episode that would trigger, or there's a concerning pattern, will trigger the next formal stage. Just be mindful, if somebody is on a stage 3, and during that 12-month monitoring period, you set their trigger points. So if they exceed a working week, if they exceed 2 episodes of absence, a 3 episode or a pattern, that will trigger them to a final absence hearing. However, say they don't trigger in that 12-month monitoring period, come off formal monitoring. In that next year, however, if they do trigger, you would expect the employee to go to stage 1. That is the case for stage people that have been on stage 1 and stage 2. But if they were previously on stage 3, they've come off monitoring, trigger again, they go straight to stage 2. If at any point employees or managers are unsure if a trigger or a formal stage has been hit, please contact your HR advisor. Conducting formal stage sickness meetings. So again, the toolkit's got lots of templates and letters and guides in there for what to cover in the formal meetings. In the meetings, you should cover the employee's sickness record, their reasons for their absences, any underlying health conditions. So consider if they have any disabilities or long-term conditions. And it might be that you need to seek advice from a qualified clinical practitioner if necessary. Consider whether there are any factors impacting on their health or any other factors, such as things outside of work, or they may have domestic problems, or they might have other employment that might be impacting on their attendance at TRFT. Remind the employee of the required level of absence. Explore ways of improving their attendance to achieve the required standards. So that includes discussing support and any adjustments. Inform the employee that their attendance is unsatisfactory and action will be taken in accordance with the policy and procedure, such as the formal stage meeting, and confirm the outcome of the meeting in writing. This must include a summary of any of the key points you've discussed and any actions you've agreed. The employee must not be in any doubt as to what the next stage of the process could be if the required improvement is not achieved. The letter must be clear about any consequences and outcome of the meeting as set out in the policy. Stage meetings. So for each of the stage meetings, you need to send an invite letter and an outcome letter summarising what you discussed in the meeting and what you agreed. This should be sent within 7 days of holding the meeting. Obviously, sometimes we understand it can take more depending on what work and pressures that you've got. So if there are any delays, just make sure you communicate with that with the employee. Again, all the template letters are available in the toolkit. So when an employee is on stage 3 and they hit a trigger during that monitoring period, they then should progress to a final absence hearing, unless it's agreed with HR that you want to extend their stage 3 monitoring period. So when they do progress to the hearing, the employee needs to be informed of this. And that should either be in that long-term sickness meeting or during their return to work interview. Alternatively, you might want to hold something what we call a formal stages review meeting. So this is after they've triggered the stage 3. You invite them into this review meeting, and that's where you go through each of the formal stages with the employee to check that both parties are in agreement that they should progress to that final absence hearing. Final absence hearings. So when an employee triggers a final absence hearing, your HR advisor will arrange the hearing and the panel. So once arranged, the employee should receive an invite to the hearing, so it's an invite letter, and they will also receive a management report. Again, the templates are available in the toolkit. So the management report will be written by the management team, so that is you and your HR advisor. Please know, if you are the manager, the final version of that management report is your responsibility. So it might be that HR have written the draft for you and sent it over to you to check. Make sure you read it and check it, because that is your report, even though HR might have wrote the majority of it. So it's vital that you understand it and you agree with it. And it needs to contain all the details of the employee's full sickness absence history at TRFT. So it needs sending to all parties at the hearing at least 7 days before the date of the hearing. If it's ready before, we understand that sometimes you might have the reports ready well in advance of the hearing. Send it. There's no point delaying that just to meet that 7 days. As long as it's before 7 days prior to the hearing, that's fine. So both the manager and the employee will have the opportunity to provide verbal and written evidence at the hearing. Any written evidence, however, though, you must send that before the hearing, and it must be shared with all parties for consideration. So at the hearing, the history of the employee's absence to date will be reviewed. This is what is covered in the management report. The review will also include reasons for the absence and when they occurred. The chair of the hearing will explain the purpose of the meeting, and that is to consider whether the employee's employment with the trust will continue, and they will consider their attendance record. So if you are ever asked to chair a hearing, please refer to the toolkit. All the scripts and the templates are in there, but also get support from your HR colleague. So the manager at a hearing will present first. Then after they've presented the case, the employee side and the panel have the opportunity to ask questions. Once that bit's finished, the employee then provides and presents their statement of case. Again, both the panel and the management side have opportunity to ask questions. Then the panel will ask both sides after to sum up their cases and adjourn. So during the adjournment, the panel will then review all the evidence and the case fully to then make a decision on that employee's continued employment. So then the hearing will reconvene and the decision will be communicated. So during that hearing, when you're presenting your side, you will summarise how you have tried to support that employee and try to help them maintain their attendance at work. You'll explain the impact their sickness has had on the department and the service. That could include finance, for example. You may have had to use agency staff, pay overtime, use bank workers. Again, it might include finance of how much time it's taken from your day to manage that sickness absence. You want to consider the impact on patient care, the delivery of services. You might have had to cancel clinics. All of that needs taken into consideration. The employee and their rep will then have the opportunity to raise any points of explanation and submit evidence where appropriate to support their case. The employee should raise any issues which they consider to be relevant to their absence, including any underlying medical conditions, any medication or treatment they might be taking, any general health concerns. If any new information is presented that has not previously been considered by the manager or occupational health, it might be you want to adjourn the hearing to refer for further occupational health advice. Any medical evidence obtained through the management of the employee's attendance today will be reviewed, as well as any support and additional information provided by the employee. Other factors that are relevant to the employee's case will also be reviewed, such as any reasonable adjustments to their role or their hours, duties, or whether you've considered redeployment. If some or all of the employee's absence is considered to be disability related or long-term condition related, and it meets the definitions outlined in the Equality Act 2010, the chair and the employee will discuss whether any additional support, modifications to their duties or hours, and redeployment could assist in ensuring their satisfactory attendance at work. The chair will also consider whether any changes to their trigger points have been made and whether it's reasonable, because it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be an adjustment to the trigger points. The chair will discuss with the employee the likelihood of their attendance reaching a satisfactory level and what the timeframes are around that. And they will then consider the impact of the employee's non-attendance in the workplace. The hearing panel are responsible for arranging any alternative rooms that might be provided. So, for example, during the adjournment of the hearing, make sure that there's a room available for the management team to wait in and the employee side separately. When the hearing reconvenes, alternatives to dismissal will be considered by the panel. However, be aware that the outcome could be dismissal from all employment with the trust. Potential outcomes from a hearing. So, consideration of redeployment into different roles for a defined period of time or adjustments to the employee's current post. It could be an adjournment of the meeting to take medical or occupational health advice on whether adjustments can be identified which would support the employee's satisfactory attendance at work. It will be the responsibility of management to consider whether any proposed adjustments are reasonable in these circumstances. It could be an extension to the stage 3 period, or the hearing could result in dismissal. The chair will write to the employee to confirm the outcome of the hearing. Again, there's a template letter in the toolkit. If the employee is dismissed, this will normally be effective from the day of the hearing. So this will be their last day of employment. They may be entitled to pay in lieu of notice, plus any payment for their outstanding annual leave. Just be mindful with annual leave, though, that if they've overtaken their entitlement at the point of the hearing and dismissal, that will be deducted from their final salary. The employee will be informed in writing of the reason for dismissal and the right to appeal against the dismissal and whom to appeal to and where to send that to. To confirm, I've not covered appeal much in the video training. Most of managers won't be expected to chair the hearing because it's normally managers that are in band 8B and above roles. So if you do fall under that and you are asked to chair a hearing or be in attendance at an appeal hearing, please speak to your HR business partner for further training and advice.